Mary Todd was born in Lexington, Connecticut, as the fourth of 7 children to Robert Smith Todd and Elizabeth Todd. Her family were slaveholders, and Mary was raised in comfort and refinement. When Mary was 6, her mother died while giving childbirth. 2 years later, her father married Elizabeth Humphreys, and they had 9 children together. Mary had a difficult relationship with her stepmother. At an early age, Mary was sent to Madame Montel's finishing school. She learned to speak French fluently and studied dance, drama, music, and social graces. By age 20, she was regarded as witty with a grasp for politics. Like her family, she was a member of the Whig Party. Mary began living with her sister Elizabeth Porter Edwards in Springfield, Illinois, in October 1839. Mary was popular among the gentry of Springfield, and though she was courted by the rising young lawyer and Democratic Party politician Stephen A. Douglas and others, she chose Abraham Lincoln, a fellow Whig. Mary Todd married Abraham Lincoln on November 4, 1842, at her sister Elizabeth's home in Springfield, Illinois. During her years as First Lady, Mary Lincoln faced many personal difficulties generated by political divisions within the nation. Her family was from a border state where slavery was permitted. Several of her half-brothers served in the Confederate Army and were killed in action, and one brother served the Confederacy as a surgeon. Mary supported her husband in his quest to save the Union and was strictly loyal to his policies. She had difficulty negotiating executive mansion social responsibilities and rivalries, spoil-seeking solicitors, and baiting newspapers in a climate of high national intrigue in Civil War Washington, D.C. She refurbished the executive mansion, which included extensive redecorating of all the public and private rooms, as well as the purchase of new dinnerware. The president was very angry over the cost, even though Congress eventually passed 2 additional appropriations to cover these expenses. As the American Civil War ended, Mrs. Lincoln expected to continue as First Lady of a nation at peace. President Lincoln awoke on the morning of April 14, 1865, in a pleasant mood. Robert E. Lee had surrendered several days before to Ulysses S. Grant, and now the president was awaiting word from North Carolina on the surrender of Joseph E. Johnston. The morning papers carried the announcement that the president and his wife would be attending the theater that evening. At one point, Mary developed a headache and was inclined to stay home, but Abraham told her he must attend because newspapers had announced that he would. She sat with her husband watching the comic play Our American Cousin at Ford's Theater. During the third act, the president and Mrs. Lincoln drew close together, holding hands while enjoying the play. 5 minutes later, President Lincoln was shot by John Wilkes Booth. Mrs. Lincoln accompanied her mortally wounded husband across the street to the Peterson house, where he was taken to a back bedroom and laid crosswise on the bed there, where Lincoln's cabinet was summoned, except William Seward, who had been seriously attacked by Lewis Powell just as Booth was about to carry out his assassination at Ford's Theater several minutes earlier. President Lincoln remained in a coma for approximately 9 hours. He died at 7:22 a.m. at the age of 56. President Lincoln was the first U.S. president to be assassinated, and therefore Mary was the first widowed First Lady. As a widow, Miss Lincoln returned to Illinois and lived in Chicago with her sons. In an act approved on July 14, 1870, the United States Congress granted Mrs. Lincoln a life pension of $3,000 a year. The death of her son Thomas in July 1871, following the death of 2 of her other sons and her husband, brought an overwhelming grief and depression. Her surviving son, Robert Lincoln, a rising young Chicago lawyer, was alarmed at his mother's increasingly erratic behavior. Due to her erratic behavior, Robert Lincoln initiated proceedings to have her institutionalized. On May 20, 1875, following a trial, a jury committed her to a private asylum in Batavia, Illinois. After the court proceedings, she was so despondent that she attempted suicide. 3 months after being committed to Bellevue Place, she devised her escape. She smuggled letters to her lawyer, James B. Bradwell, and his wife, Myra Bradwell. She also wrote to the editor of the Chicago Times. Soon the public embarrassments that Robert Lincoln had hoped to avoid were looming, and his character and motives were in question, as he controlled his mother's finances. In the face of potentially damaging publicity, the director of Bellevue Place declared her well enough to go to Springfield to live with her sister Elizabeth as she desired. Mary Lincoln was declared competent to to manage her own affairs in 1876. Miss Lincoln spent the next 4 years traveling throughout Europe and took up residence at Pau, France. Her final years were marked by declining health. She suffered from severe cataracts that reduced her eyesight. In 1879, she suffered spinal cord injuries in a fall from a stepladder. She traveled to New York in 1881 and lobbied for an increased pension after the assassination of President Garfield, raised the issue of provisions for his family. During the early 1880s, Mary Lincoln was confined to Springfield, Illinois. On July 15, 1882, she collapsed at her sister's home, lapsed into a coma, and died the next morning of a stroke at age 63. Her funeral service was held at First Presbyterian Church, Springfield, Illinois.